We acknowledge that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Lummi Nation and Nooksack Tribe, for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Oh, I see we have a couple more people to let in. I think we have a great group today. Thanks for joining. My name's Terry Bryant. I'm the chair of this group. And I invite you to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. And if you want to add your email, if you haven't already been on our mailing list, we will make sure that you get added to it. I want to acknowledge a couple things before we move on. One, that June is Pride Month to celebrate our LGBTQ community members. And I want to acknowledge Juneteenth this month too, to recognize emancipation being finally recognized in the state of Texas when it was already declared much earlier. Sorry, it's difficult to manage the waiting room and run the meeting. Apologies. Today we have a great panel. We have folks here today that are going to do a presentation on the Whatcom County Justice Project. We've got Kayla Schott-Bresler, Strategic Initiatives Manager with Whatcom County Executive's Office. We've got Stephen Gockley here representing the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. He's the chair. And Mike Parker from Opportunity Council, Housing and Health Integration Manager, my mentor and predecessor. Welcome, all three of you. I'm looking forward to your presentation. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Terry. Hi, everyone. I'm Kayla. It's really good to be here and get the opportunity to connect with you all. As Terry mentioned, I work here in the executive's office, but my background is working in housing as a housing advocate, and then down in Skagit County with our housing programs for several years. So it's good to be in your company today and work on the issue that is nearest and dearest to my heart. I mostly just want to start by laying a foundation of why we're here today, and then Stephen's going to dive in a little bit into the details of the background before turning it over to Mike and back to myself. So in terms of questions, maybe you all can like pop those into the chat, and then Terry, Mike, myself, and Stephen can try to work to facilitate questions as feels comfortable. The county has been working for quite some time on planning for incarceration prevention and reduction under the leadership of the county council, county executive, and most of all through the community incarceration and prevention and reduction task force and stakeholder advisory committee. And a lot of that conversation has centered on sort of the need for a new justice facility, behavioral health resources, diversion resources. But I also am seeing this huge recognition through that process that housing is an important and critical aspect of services that are going to need to be delivered to keep people out of jail. And as the planning work gets further underway, there's some specific ideas and commitments being made to funding housing projects. And that's what we wanted to talk to you about today, and to get your feedback on and let you know about other opportunities to formally comment and just really kick off a planning conversation around housing for folks who are involved with the criminal legal system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen to introduce himself and provide a little bit more background.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me and the other presenters here today. Appreciate the work you do, the difficult work you do every day. I am the co-chair of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force. It's a public-private kind of collaboration set up by County Council Ordinance in 2015, I think. Before that, I was a civil legal aid lawyer. Many of my clients interacted with the justice system. Many of my clients were experiencing homelessness at the time, or before or after I tried to help. I'm also right now on the Board of Commissioners, the Housing Authority, so I have a fondness for housing efforts. And I was a sort of a gadfly to the Housing Authority when I was a tenant lawyer. And I'm also newly appointed to the Behavioral Health Advisory Committee for the County Department of Health and Community Services. So I'm interested in that intersection with the criminal, legal, and the housing issues. I just want to say that this work has been going on since the task force was formed in 2015. That came about when the first jail ballot initiative was defeated. And it continued through 2017 when the second one was defeated. What I want to say is that most of us involved by that time heard loud and clear the community voice, I think quite rightly, that vehemently said, we need more than a new jail. We need to be diverting people from incarceration. We need to be addressing root causes of why people come to that point in their lives. We need treatment services rather than a jail cell. And so that's been a lot of the focus of the task force since that time. Most of you have seen the Vera report that we contracted for and some of the criticisms and recommendations they made in 2018. Those led the task force to develop the GRACE program, to promote the LEAD program, to endorse the alternative response team and the health department's co-responder program with the sheriff's office. We've engaged in making pretrial improvements so that fewer people were simply kept in jail awaiting trial for months because they couldn't afford bail. To Mike's great credit, we pushed the county into becoming a member of the Government Alliance on Race and Equity and endorsing a racial equity lens in all of our work. We brought in a national evaluation for our drug court program that's made some improvements to its effectiveness. And we sort of oversaw, encouraged, cheered from the sidelines as the health department constructed and then stood up programming for the Ann Deacon Center for Hope up on Division Street in Iron Gate, which is our new expanded crisis stabilization center. All of that is the years of planning and the years of work that have gotten us to this point. The Stakeholder Advisory Committee that Kayla mentioned did a needs assessment report. It took a year. Mike was a part of that group that helped to develop some of the behavioral health needs for that. And the council adopted that and charged the task force and a planning team to start proposing some implementation projects for that. We've been looking at a 1 to 3 year time frame, not necessarily that we'll complete those projects in that time, but at least we'll get them underway. What I want to say was that needs assessment process and the implementation planning process have adopted a best practice called the strategic intercept model. It looks at a continuum of time in which there's possible engagement with people who are struggling in our community on a variety of fronts, some of which lead them to contact with the law enforcement system and the criminal legal system, some of which do not. They leave them homeless and unserved or underserved. But I recommend you look at the strategic intercept model updated in the needs assessment report, because it gives you an idea where this implementation plan is going. We're looking at a multi-service, multi-stage, coordinated kind of system that's nested around an adequately sized jail. So we've gone well beyond thinking about incarceration as an isolated piece of our community, and we've seen it as sort of the last resort in a whole array of services that we hope really address individual needs in the longer term and really provide a response to those individual needs that approaches people with dignity and respect and real caring. So Kayla, we're going to go to the next slide. What you see here are strategies that the Justice Project implementation planning team is working with. This is sort of the heading, the bullets under which the 15 implementation projects we've proposed are falling. We want to ensure oversight, accountability, and transparency. We want to improve in this respect the data we are collecting, the way we're sharing data and making policy decisions, the transparency of data to each other and to the public, because that's the way these systems will be able to be held accountable. And we also want in this oversight part of things to incorporate and increase the participation of BIPOC and people with lived experience into these processes, so that those voices are actually guiding the work that we hope will benefit the community. And another bundle of projects fall under the heading of increasing access to behavioral health services. We've talked a lot to behavioral health provider agencies. Many of you are here. We understand the limited capacity we already have for serving the community. And if we are to divert and better treat more people rather than incarcerate them, we're going to need to strengthen your capabilities to provide those services, expand the capacity quite a bit under quite trying circumstances. We get that message clearly from you, but there's a strong commitment both in a policy level, a political level, and in a funding level to accomplish that second goal, increasing access. A lot of these services need a place to serve, and so we see a big part of our effort is to increase the capital expenditures we're making to diversify the kinds of facilities that would promote public safety and health. What we've done, I mentioned, was the Ann Deacon Center for Hope, the Crisis Stabilization Center in Iron Gate. We received $10 million in state money to build that facility. We carefully designed it so that it can access Medicaid funding for both a behavioral health service wing and a substance use disorder treatment wing. So we felt good about that. We're still working out the kinks of that and getting that fully utilized in the community. The other project that we accomplished largely at the impetus of the Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force was we developed the old and priorly abandoned detox facility on Girard Street that many of you may remember from quite a number of years past. We got that donated from Peace Health to the Opportunity Council. We secured $9 million from our legislative delegation. We rehabbed that house quite a bit. And we engaged Lifeline services to do 24/7 clean and sober housing, case management, and oversight. So we have 16 people in that facility. And it's largely intended for participants in the recovery court, formerly known as the drug court program. When we talked to then Judge Montoya Lewis and the staff for drug court, we asked them what would be the one thing that would make a difference in the success of drug court participants. And they said someplace that they could live clean and sober, away from their peer group that they were involved with when they got in trouble, so that they could actually proceed through treatment and meet the goals and the expectations of that program. So that is there now functioning and supporting those recovery court participants. In the pipeline of facilities, we've gotten $9 million out of the most recent state legislative session to build a 23-hour crisis relief center. That's a term of art for a behavioral health acute care center. It's sort of an initial entry point, a drop-off point. It's a 24/7 available facility. The 23 hours is simply a funding requirement. You can't stay longer than 23 hours and 59 minutes if you want to use the kind of funding we're hoping to fund for the operations of that facility. So that's to come. We're also committed to working with local and regional partnerships to explore the possibility of voluntary and involuntary treatment, both for behavioral health and for substance use disorder. Honestly, as probably most of you know better than I, the challenge of getting people in distress to voluntarily choose to go into treatment and then stay in treatment to achieve some positive outcomes is a big hurdle in this process of diverting and treating rather than incarcerating. So we're going to be looking and talking with potential partners such as the North Sound Administrative Services Organization for regional behavioral health services about funding and possibilities region-wide for those kinds of things. The fourth strategy we have is to expand the capacity of programs that are in existence to reduce incarceration and recidivism, reincarceration. We want to increase the diversion services we have. As I mentioned, GRACE and LEAD are both diversion, redirection, and engagement, case management, intensive case management services. The alternative response team and the co-responder program are attempts to respond to the voices in 2020 that called for less of a reliance on armed law enforcement response to crisis situations and more of a sensitive, professional, therapeutic kind of response. Both of those programs provide some of that, as do the existing MCOT program and our therapeutic courts as another way to reduce holding people in jail rather than providing more positive rehabilitative services. And lastly, we want to look at making systems changes with local, regional, state partners. Some of those are in our courts. We have a chance to rethink charging decisions, work cooperatively with the prosecutor's office for the county and for localities. We want to reduce length of stay where we can. We have a work group with the Superior Court judges working hard to improve and continually assess our ability to make pretrial release decisions without sacrificing community safety and to monitor those who are released. So this is the skeleton. This is the framework of these implementation projects that are coming before the council beginning next week. Actually, the implementation plan has been submitted to county council, and they'll be taking it up. You can look in on those sessions via Zoom if you want. The document is online on the Justice Project website under the county council page. There's still time, and we welcome feedback that each of you, from your professional growth, your on the street experience, and your perspective working with these clients, might want to contribute to this process. So at this point, I'd turn it over to you, Mike, and we can focus in out of this melange of focuses. We can single out the housing issues that we're trying to work on.
Now we're getting to where I get really excited. So thanks again for having us. To reiterate what you heard from both the other presenters, what better place to talk about housing for folks experiencing homelessness that might get picked up by a criminal legal system than the Whatcom County Coalition on Homelessness. It's nice to see you all again. Again, my name is Mike Parker. I'm co-chair of the Behavioral Health Subcommittee of the task force. Do a lot of work with the task force. I'm also a social worker, and in my past, I've worked directly with folks experiencing homelessness as a case manager. And so I've seen it from a couple of different lenses. And from my personal standpoint, when Stephen mentioned that, we brought forth jail initiatives to the voters of Whatcom County, and they soundly defeated them. Stephen talked a lot about, well, they said, you're not giving people behavioral health resources, right? A lot of the people we're arresting and have in jail really are ill and are not getting services. There's another key part or key aspect for those folks that are frequently incarcerated. A lot of them are experiencing homelessness. Some people, their first infractions that ever happen are secondary to their being homeless, right? So until we fix that issue, I can see why voters resoundingly defeated them, because they said you're not addressing some of the root causes. So and this slide, we really want to talk about what are some of those considerations, what are some of those observations. And I would also say, I'm going to invite, there's a Q&A session after our presentation, and really invite, critiques and additional system gaps. But I will go over some of the ones that the task force has wrestled with and some of the things that we wrestle with in the Behavioral Health Subcommittee. So some of the system gaps that we see for folks that, and really I'm going to zone in on the folks that are either, unstably housed, maybe either doubling up, or people that are literally homeless. And for many of those folks, they may run into eligibility issues with the existing homeless housing resources. So I know that most of the folks in this group are probably pretty aware of those and what those rules might be. But obviously having a criminal record makes it very, very difficult to get housing. And so another aspect is a lot of folks, when they're in an incarcerated setting, so they're in jail, they may not be eligible to get in a coordinated entry at that time. So one of the system gaps really is eligibility, and that somebody having a criminal record may make it ineligible for them to get into housing. Another huge gap we have is simply there's just not enough housing. That's true for any group that we might talk about. So for example, in Whatcom County, a lot of our housing resources are steered towards a couple of key groups: families with children, for one, and there really just is not enough to go around. So obviously we have a serious capacity problem. And what we've also realized too is that it's not just all capacity. It's not just that any housing is good housing. We need targeted responses for folks with criminal legal backgrounds. Part of that is in the eligibility, just being able to get into housing. Part of it is that there may be unique needs that they have to stay in good graces of Department of Corrections or various things. Some people, when they've come out of incarcerated settings, may be ready for life changes, and they may need clean and sober housing. They may be seeking that. So there's a variety of different of gaps in housing resources, and so that's part of what the group has been looking at. Another aspect is the complexity of trying to find housing. So another system gap that we have is just navigating that. And as if you're a case manager on this call today, or if you're involved in navigation, you know that there's a lot of people you haven't been able to get to. If you're in street outreach, you know you can't get to everybody you want to help them navigate the system. So, navigation and assistance with that, and a lack of spaces for people to transit when they first get out of jail. So those are some of the large system gaps that we've looked at. And just to recap, I would say we need dedicated housing for folks that have experienced incarceration, and that be the eligibility criteria. So that's one of our huge problems, because people get out of jail, they're not able to make the changes. There's no support for them to make a change or do something different. And there's certainly no housing for them to be safe. And so we see many people just not able to break out of the cycle of going in and out of our criminal legal system. Why does that matter for the Justice Project? Well, obviously, if we can house people, we don't need as big of a jail. So I think I can just be really plain spoken here. The more people we can divert, we can house, we can address their needs with dignity, the less people we'll have to arrest and to put into jail. So that's really the crux of this argument. For my second point, so how do we integrate that, right? And these are kind of disparate things. One, the group is looking at what kind of jail do we need and what size and what services should it have, and how can we actually have some place that's more about rehabilitation, right, than just a penalty for an infraction. So they seem disparate, but they actually were not. And the stakeholder advisory group really put the planners to the test and kept bringing up how important and how really you cannot separate these issues. You cannot separate planning for your jail to what size you have until you've dealt with some of the housing issues. So obviously we looked at the gaps that we just talked about, and there are some ways going forward and ways too for this group to be involved. So for example, greater integration with county groups that are charged with housing. So I think there's a couple of folks on this call that are on the Whatcom County Housing Advisory Committee. And a path forward for that group could be to specifically tackle the question and participate in planning efforts to lift up, create new housing options for those that are criminal legal system involved. So that's just one way to integrate. Another way is working directly with folks like you and directly on an agency by agency basis and to see what is possible to lift up. We haven't just a quick call out for Pioneer Human Services and their Citygate housing. We haven't really had new housing specifically targeted for justice involved folks since Citygate. And that's a really, really long time. So there's a lot of us that think that it's high time to create some housing and to target that to folks that we're arresting. And then on the last piece, opportunity to provide feedback to Whatcom County. That's one of the reasons that we're here. And there have been opportunities along the way. So Stephen talked about a year-long process, right? They're trying to get feedback from the community. There are still opportunities. So obviously today, and anything that you care to share, feedback, good, bad, or different, we would like to hear from you today and be able to take that back into the process. And also there's going to be a slide at the end of this, but I would just encourage you as a citizen, as a coalition member, to be involved as much as possible. You guys have a lot of housing knowledge about what works and what doesn't. And I think the planning process only benefits from having that type of feedback. It's absolutely critical. So I'm not saying it hasn't been there. There certainly has been. I think there's room for more. So, and I think for the Whatcom County Housing Advisory Committee, Incarceration Task Force, and other countywide groups looking at housing, I would just solicit, ask, /beg, give them your thoughts about what you know works. Tell them your personal stories of what worked or what didn't work. I think all those things help as people are trying to address, divert to where, right? So if we create a great diversion program, or like Stephen mentioned, we had a high functioning drug court, that people weren't supported when they were homeless. It was very, very difficult for people to follow through when they're homeless. So, that type of feedback can actually drive change. And so I guess I just encourage everybody here to stay loud, stay noisy, and find a way to plug in. And with that, I'll turn it on to Kayla, who's got our next slide.
Sorry, everyone. You would think it's been 3 years and I would know how to share my screen and unmute at the same time, but unfortunately, I was not capable of that. So just bear with me for a minute. All right.
I think you did that just to make me feel better.
Thanks. Thanks. Can folks still see my screen in a normal, good way? Is that?
Yep.
Yes.
You're perfect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry for the disruption in the flow. So I just want to zoom in a little bit more on the housing piece of the implementation plan. And I think this falls under the goal strategy around preventing, reducing and preventing incarceration. And Stephen's nodding his head, so I think I haven't messed that up. So I just want to share the language. So the goal here is to maintain and expand supportive housing programs for people with behavioral health issues and a history of incarceration. This could include additional housing facilities and then also providing additional case management and clinical support services for existing supportive or recovery housing projects. And so there was a real recognition that not only do we need to bring new resources online, but we need to make sure that the resources that exist are adequately staffed and adequately funded to provide the services that the community is demanding. So the implementation plan, if you go online and look at it, has, I don't know, like 16 projects, I think, and each project has a little table that looks like this that shows some more detail on what's being proposed. And so for the housing strategy, there's, I would say, an emphasis on like just an initial assessment of supportive housing needs and gaps for existing projects and existing providers. So a question like that would be like, what else does Francis Place need or 22 North need in order to be successful in helping folks retain permanent housing? And then a broader recognition that there's just like this huge gap of dedicated beds for people who are involved in the criminal legal system, as Mike mentioned. And so with that, it's thinking through what types of providers, what types of projects, and what types of funding is necessary to meet this need. And what we've been thinking about is sort of a two-pronged approach. One prong that like focuses on small recovery housing or supportive housing projects that are potentially taken on by behavioral health providers, homeless service providers. And those are sort of being thought of as dedicated beds, potentially for like specific programs. So perhaps that's more recovery court housing, therapeutic court housing broadly, housing for folks who are involved with LEAD or GRACE or alternative response, or maybe just some folks who are referred in through coordinated entry or behavioral health providers. I think that is very much up for discussion and something we're really soliciting feedback on. So we welcome those comments today and at other times. I think that the county, which I'm going to provide a little bit more detail on in a second, it wants to make some commitments around capital and operating funding for these facilities, using some local funds, trying to support providers in better leveraging and applying for state funds, and doing whatever we can to bring these sort of decentralized resources online and build up homes for people who need them, who have been involved in the criminal legal system. I think we also recognize the need that Mike identified around reentry housing and a large permanent supportive housing project being potentially the best vehicle to meet that broad community need. So like another Citygate-like project. And so thinking through what planning for that type of project could look like, trying to get in the pipeline for applying for federal tax credit, state housing trust fund, and really trying to recruit a provider who has the experience and commitment to do that. And so one of the things the county is really proposing that we commit to take on is just that planning effort around that project, and something that Mike's been a strong advocate on. So appreciate that. And I think, that planning effort could be looking at the land that the county and the city and other jurisdictions have where a new apartment building could go. It could be funding pre-development costs. It could be putting out an RFP with a large amount of capital money to get the interest rolling from large providers. So I think there's a lot of different paths we could take there. And then just a little bit more detail on the funding that's being proposed. And this is all publicly available in the implementation plan, but also I just want to emphasize that these are tentative preliminary estimates. We don't know how revenue fluctuates over time. And we also don't know, once we have conversations with individual providers, what they're going to say they need to make projects work. So these are preliminary, but we're proposing $50,000 to do this permanent supportive housing needs assessment to think about gaps in existing projects. Potentially $750,000 a year on an ongoing basis to fill those gaps in supportive housing projects. Potentially $2 million for a small recovery or supportive housing capital RFP. We think to operate those small facilities could be another $1 million a year of local funding that's needed. And then sort of replicating that on the large reentry supportive housing project that I was talking about, which I think realistically is a little further down the road than some of these smaller things that could be done more quickly. And I think we look, this is sort of our best proposal at how we think we can bring new resources online and what the funding mix needs to be, but really welcome feedback. And if you all have other ideas for how to make this happen, we're all ears, and the county's actively engaged with some providers around their dreams and their wishes for new housing for that their agency would own, and just want to put an open invitation out there to all of you on this call and other providers in the community, whether you're a behavioral health provider, a homeless service provider, a different type of social service provider. Please get in touch with me. I'll put my name in the chat, and we want to hear from you and have those early conversations around what your plans are, so that way we make sure that the funding opportunities we're developing are in line with what the community wants to do. So I just want to provide a little more information on next steps. I think Stephen shared some of this. The Whatcom County Council is going to be reviewing the full implementation plan at the June 6th meeting, and we expect further discussion on that over the next several county council meetings, which are every other or twice a month on Tuesdays. The Incarceration Prevention and Reduction Task Force is going to vote on the implementation plan at their June 12th meeting, and they are welcoming feedback from the community, from providers, all of you. And so please send that before June 11th, whether that's a formal comment letter that your agency or the coalition or a group of folks want to make, or just a quick email saying like, hey, have you thought of this? All of that is welcome. All of that is reviewed. All of that is appreciated. I do want to note that this information that I'm putting on the slide here is different than what we sent out yesterday through Terry. I just there's an update on the email address, so please use this one. I'm going to pop my contact information in the chat as well, and then just want to open it up for discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can all look at one another.
Well, I'll start, and I want to say that I will do my best to monitor the chat. Also, I can read out questions and comments, but one thing I'm kind of thinking is that when we're talking about supportive housing, we often talk about capital, building the building, operations, the services inside, but sometimes we don't give enough consideration to the rent that needs to be paid. And usually for folks, they need a pretty significant subsidy. And what I've seen is mismatching that subsidy can cause a lot of problems. For example, if we try to use a subsidy called Shelter Plus Care, which is housing first oriented and significantly for chronically homeless individuals, if they don't meet that definition, they wouldn't be eligible for the housing that was intended for them. So that's something I would caution against. And that housing first piece of that particular type of subsidy does not allow people to require clean and sober housing. So just a caution about aligning subsidy with the purpose and the mission of the project.
Thanks, Terry.
I'll just add, Terry, that that's one of the really gnarly aspects of responding in this way is there's no single pot of money that's adequate to do what the community needs done. There are many much smaller pots of money, each of which have their own criteria and restrictions and who would be eligible for them. So trying to patch all this together, and I see Brian Thane on the in the group as well. And so from the Housing Authority perspective, you know, his job is to pull 10 funding sources in to build something like Samish Commons on Samish Way, and that's true for any affordable housing developer.
So do folks have questions? I think we can take some questions. We can also pose questions to all of you to facilitate discussion. I think we all, Steve and Mike and I all have things in our mind that we're curious about your feedback on, but just want to leave some space in case you all have questions first. And if you're more comfortable just popping them into the chat, Terry and I are keeping our eyes on that as well. So either way.
I'm going to ask a question because this would be one that I would be burning to know. Kayla, you talked a lot about some of the proposed funding. And can you tell us how that would affect, the scarce funding that's already out there for homeless housing? I think one of the things that people might be interested in is when we talk about stuff, are we talking about adding new resources? Are you talking about repurposing old ones? What would be the effect to folks that are already in housing programs from what you're showing us on those slides?
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate that question. So on the capital, we're talking about new resources, right? Like we would not take money away from, existing service contracts or anything like that in order to do a new capital project. So those are new additional resources coming from local housing funds that we've been planning to use for new capital projects, the behavioral health fund reserves potentially, and then the proposed justice sales tax as well. And then obviously there would be quite a large need to bring state and federal funding into those capital projects as well, particularly for the large one, less so for the small ones. On the operating side of things, those same funding sources are being proposed to cover a share of operating costs, and the intention is absolutely to do what we can to have those be like new and additional resources coming online. Not that the county is going to take document recording fees from a homeless services contract and repurpose it, but all of this there is a finite amount of resources. So over time, as the community prioritizes populations, like it's necessarily we are prioritizing one population over another. So even if there's not sort of the direct reduction of a single contract in order to fund something else, it is, this is all one pool of funds. And I think that this coalition's feedback on the desire to do something specifically for the population that's involved in the criminal justice system and having that be a recognized population priority is a place where your feedback is welcome. Does that answer, Mike?
Yes, thank you.
I have more of a, oh, I'm sorry. Did I jump in over somebody? Okay. I have more of a comment as opposed to a question. My name's Lindsay. I'm the re-entry specialist here at the jail. And so I am the one that's working with all of the inmates as they are preparing to leave, and all the inmates that are homeless as they're preparing to leave. And one of the things that I would just kind of like people to think about that I feel is a pretty large barrier is that oftentimes some of our most severely mentally ill individuals, they might be scheduled to go to Western State Hospital for a civil commitment. And because of that, really, we haven't been working with them on any reentry planning because they're scheduled to go to Western State Hospital. And for a civil commitment, their charges have been dismissed. What'll happen, and what's been happening more and more lately, is that Western State Hospital is not taking these individuals. They say, we don't have the beds, they're not sick enough. And I find out usually a day before they're supposed to be going. And because their charges have been dismissed, they're now being released to the community. And these are really, really sick individuals. They're not always enrolled with GRACE or LEAD or a PACT program. And they are now releasing to the community with nowhere to go. They haven't started with the coordinated entry process. There's no time to get them into the Sun House. I can maybe put them into crisis triage for 4 or 5 days, but even beyond that, then they're back out on the streets. And so really they're going into base camp ultimately. And this is happening more and more. And then other times we have what's very, very common is that individuals' court cases will be continued and continued and continued, and then they will go to court on a Thursday Superior Court calendar, and they will get sentenced to time served. And we will get very little time, very little heads up, and they'll go to court at 8:30 that morning, and they'll get released that evening. And if I'm lucky, the attorney will reach out to me like a couple days ahead or the day ahead and let me know that's happening. But again, there isn't time to put in an application for Sun House or really to do any sort of hunting for housing. And so what I can do is give them a packet of resources and say, hey, this is where Opportunity Council is. This is the phone number, and hope that they make it there. So it's something to think about. If we can, if we could do some type of housing that would be for our really sick individuals, or something that's similar to crisis triage, but that could be a little bit more long-term, maybe not even as not as supportive necessarily as crisis triage. They don't need the medical care or whatnot, but somewhere that these people with these mental illnesses that have been stabilized here in the jail can go while we get them connected with services and try to get them into coordinated entry and start looking for housing for them when they get out of custody. So that's my take.
Thanks, Lindsay. That's extremely useful and feedback. And thanks for sharing that. Stephen, did you have something you wanted to say in reaction? Or
Yeah, first I'll express my appreciation for your perspective on that and your experience, Lindsay. Thank you. Reentry has been an increasingly central focus in task force discussions and planning for at least the past year. I think we're really seeing that as a fulcrum point where we can really make a difference on the arc that people take coming out of the jail. Very much value the work you do. I think one of the things we're looking at is cloning you a couple times over and getting some more reentry specialist positions in the jail. Embedding a couple more reentry specialists in community agencies, partnering out in the community, so that there can start to be some coordination, some continuity, some warm handoffs amongst you. And as soon as you look at any sort of effective reentry package of services, housing rises right to the top. So, those are really closely intertwined areas of focus, and we're doing our best to try to keep those integrated, keep those together in mind. So very valuable to hear the importance you place on those, and we'll try to stay in touch as we go forward with some of these projects.
it looks like Joe has a question around how on earth are we going to staff all these new housing and behavioral health resources that are being planned. It's been a big topic of conversation and is a big concern. I mean, I think we can say we're working on behavioral health workforce development, but people can't appear immediately out of thin air. So I don't know, Stephen, if you want to comment a little bit more on those conversations, but I think we definitely recognize it's an issue.
Well, actually, right before Joe popped his comment in and Kelsey seconded it, I was going to ask you, Kayla, one of your slides had $750,000 a year to strengthen community-based programs. And one of the constant messages we get from provider agencies is, A, I can't hire, B, I can't retain, C, I can't compete with private, better paying, much easier work providers. So, you know, making the compensation that these very highly skilled people do with the most acute, most at-risk, most vulnerable, sometimes least cooperative clients that you can imagine. You know, they need to be able to pay commensurately with what we're asking them to do. And I'm wondering if somewhere in that pot of money you were seeing on an annual basis to support community programs, whether pay enhancements for that kind of work might be in that picture. Because I think, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that was at least a seed, if not the core of that comment.
Yeah, I don't know if Chris, I see Chris and Barbara are on here too. So please feel free to chime in if you all are having specific conversations about this over in the health department. You know, I haven't, I don't know that. Obviously, we recognize that folks doing this work deserve to make more money than they are, and that this is extremely challenging. I don't feel like we've gotten into the specifics yet of what that looks like and how this funding could be targeted towards wage enhancements or anything like that. I will say the county's having really similar conversations across a lot of community needs about workforce challenges, whether it be housing, behavioral health, or childcare. I think that's a place where we've been really talking about workers' wages a lot. And under the new Healthy Children's Fund, there's discussions around like wage enhancement for childcare workers. And so thinking through opportunities to think across different systems and the recruitment and retention challenges is something that's on my mind, but haven't dived in yet.
Yeah, and I'll just thank you. That's a realistic response. I wasn't really trying to put you on the spot there. I'll just add that Mike and I and some other people coming out of the task force took a run at trying to have Representative Rule work through at least a budget proviso this past session that would target Medicaid reimbursement rates toward people who worked with our collective population here. That's a really complicated issue to frame for lay people who aren't knee deep in this stuff every day. It's also very challenging to get enough aye votes amongst less interested legislative people who have all sorts of other competing demands. So I'm increasingly eyeing local responses to the extent we can frame them in some sort of sustainable way. And I know sustainability of that kind of improvement is a key criterion.
I would just add from the behavioral health subcommittee of the task force, it was like one of the #1 issues that was brought up from the members of that group was behavioral health workforce from numerous different, whether you're working at it or you're trying to hire it, or you're Whatcom Community College trying to lift up a new Bachelor of Social Work program. I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. The only reason I bring this up is I think there's more than just money involved. And what happened and what a lot of providers shared with the group was during the pandemic, a lot of people left the work. And so pay is certainly a part of it, but the care and compassion, secondary trauma, various things. Sometimes I feel like I'm preaching the choir when I talk to this group because you all know it, but it's also a factor. And I just wanted to just let people know that it's not just the pay, it's really that work environment and feeling validated for that work is also things that we look at. No clear answers, but man, that is that spot on, Joe.
And the workforce issue that we face isn't just in the behavioral health workforce. I'm talking about this arena specifically. The intensive and specialized housing case management that's required to do supportive housing well is the same kind of problem. And Terry was involved in a number of those conversations as well. So a lot of issues to try to wrestle to the ground at the same time.
Vaughn, I think you had your hand up and then we'll go to the chat.
Thank you. So at I think it was the 24th was a listening session. And I'm still thinking about it. I think that having more of a jail facility or like an incarceration facility for folks who are more likely to be violent over at the Iron Gate Division area, and then having, I think it was 16 acres over at the La Bounty site. Is that correct? 16?
It's more than 16. I think it's 39 total, and maybe 15 developable. So maybe that's the figure you had in mind, Bob.
Oh, okay. And that area, I was thinking, would be more geared toward the housing, and housing for folks who are like maybe undergoing the legal process for disability. I was in it for 6 years, and I had to a lot of proof. I had to do a lot of proving of like my situation and my health in order to get that second court date that would eventually, where the judge finally believed me. And that's me without having any addiction issues with harder drugs or anything like that, and having no criminal record. So I was thinking with the housing, that 15 acres that's developable. And also, if I recall, on the 24th, there was also the talking about folks who were, I think the word is competency. How ironic that I have a hard time with that word. So they're waiting for to get seen by judges to then be like, are you competent? Are you not competent? And so there's like a whole, I think it was a year-long backlog. Is that correct? Yeah. So many people who are super vulnerable in super vulnerable situations who are on these massive wait lists. And I was just thinking that La Bounty site that is 15 acres would be a great site. So if we could split the two somehow, I don't know, that's how it's pictured in my mind. About funding, something that I've been trying to look into recently that's full of vagary, which entices me because I feel like there's might be an answer in there, is the lottery system in terms of like the Washington lottery. Like there's hundreds of millions of dollars within Powerball and with Mega Millions and all this stuff that you have like an abysmal chance of winning, but people play. And when they win, if they take the cash option, you shave off 50 to 55% of that, and you get, instead of, getting your bajillion, you get your half a bajillion in cash if you want cash right away. And I was I don't know much, but I'm trying to figure out if anybody here has an idea of how to start a lottery system that is completely geared toward housing. I mean, right now, the Washington Lotto supposedly is geared toward education. But if you've heard about all of the budget cuts, I'm kind of like a wee bit skeptical. But ideally, yeah, that would go all into education, and there would be an ample amount to fund all the educational resources that we need. But then I wonder about those folks who win the huge jackpot and they walk away with $35 million in cash. We don't hear from them again. But what if there was some sort of lotto where you get your jackpot, it's the 50% or 55% that's put toward housing, it goes immediately toward housing. But is there a way that also whoever wins has a commitment to developing more housing? And yeah, you get your cush and you get your early retirement or whatever, but you still have that promise that you've made to your neighbors to fund this thing. And I'm wondering if that could be a way also to support more scholarships for people to get into the behavioral health programs and nursing programs. Wait lists for nursing programs are really long. Wait lists for grad programs are really long. There's so much that, that's all stuck. And I'm wondering if maybe a new lotto system might break some of the rigidity that's here right now, some of the scarcity that's here right now. Am I still being cogent?
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Vaughn. I think we all operate in this like environment of scarcity in terms of resources. And certainly as someone who thinks a lot about funding that's needed to make all these important community programs happening. Like I'm operating in a place of scarcity, and so I think thinking creatively about different revenue options is the way to go, and more community and private sector participation in meeting these challenges. And so, you know, whether it be some sort of game that the community can play to get involved, or bring the philanthropic sector in more, I think there is an opportunity to push the bounds on how we've traditionally funded services. And I just really appreciate your creative thinking. Megan and Eve have some questions around safe use sites. I don't know, Mike or Stephen, if you want to share if any of this has come up in the planning conversations.
I can't say that I'm aware of any. Mike, that might have come up in behavioral health committee conversations. I'm not sure. I try to stay abreast of those, but no, I'm not sure we've gotten down to that level of analysis.
Yeah, I would say it has been brought up, not entwined in this, and I think that's a perfect piece of feedback to take. And I love ideas that haven't been thought of. So I would credit that with, hasn't been tied to how that might reduce the overall population that we might need to jail in the first place. So thank you for that idea. It's a great idea. I know that we did talk with folks in terms of the harm reduction lens about how difficult it can be just to have needle exchange in the county, and how sometimes we run into pockets of resistance around that. But as a harm reduction advocate, I say spot on. And I think it should be included in the basket of things that could help.
I also appreciate the just like the recognition of this as a piece of the puzzle for that challenge that I know many permanent supportive housing providers and residents are experiencing right now. And we're always, you know, we sit around, we're like, what are we going to do? You know, like folks need to retain their housing, but we've contaminated units and all of these things that we're all struggling with, and hadn't really made the connection between this and that problem. So just appreciate that link. Harry.
I have so much to say, but I don't want to hog the time. So if someone else wants to speak, please interrupt me. But I just want to call out what Joe said in chat about employee acquisition, retention, and training. Super important to that. And I've lost a lot of really quality colleagues over the years to other professions. And I think maybe there's a life cycle to this kind of work. Maybe we can't expect people to work these jobs in perpetuity or for long lengths of time. I mean, Joe is an absolute saint. You've been doing this work a lot longer than me, for sure. But I think we need to have a pipeline of attracting new staff, and that probably is a partnership with Western or Whatcom Community College.
Harry, I would just add that your agency Opportunity Council is working on becoming a site where students might be able to get practicum experience. So obviously they pair, you know, the education in the classroom, but also with real life experience and internships. They're usually called practicums. So we're looking to partner with that program. So crossing fingers that addresses the pipeline. And Joe, I really appreciate you calling out the other aspects. I said it was more than just pay. You talked about just the recruitment part too. And you know, we're starting to see hiring bonuses, moving bonuses. You know, it's a lot of different ways to address this. And I don't think any of them are bad ideas. It's just how do we do it? And how do we do it in a way it's effective and that's honoring and hopefully sustainable.
Barbara.
I don't hear Barbara. Does anyone else hear Barbara? Nuts. Sorry, Barb.
Okay.
Barbara, do you want to write your question in the chat? Okay. Chris, do you want to ask a question while we await Barbara's?
Yeah, and it's not even a question, it's just a quick comment or bit of information. I know this is sort of a Band-Aid solution. I'm going to put it in the chat box. There's something called homeless worker stipend. Tomorrow at 5 o'clock is the last time to apply for the first round. So you've got about 24 hours left. I think most people probably already know about this, but just in case if you don't, that's a way to catch up to $2,000 to make you feel less bad about being underpaid for really hard work. So that's my comment.
Real quick on Chris's point, by the way, that was voters and people that advocated from coalitions like yours that put pressure on the legislature to address all that hard work that went on during the pandemic. And I just want to underscore how powerful your voice is and advocacy is. And if you remember from me in my time in the coalition, I'd bang that drum as much as possible. But the program that Chris talked about was squarely the only reason why we have even that. Was because of advocacy and your voice. So, please use it to share your wisdom, your observations, and your challenges.
Barbara asked about opportunity for input from folks who are on probation or parole, and wondering if Stephen can address that.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I was about to. Thanks, Kayla, and thank you for the question, Barbara. The District Court Probation Office serves both District Court, which is less serious crimes, usually misdemeanors or gross misdemeanors. It also contracts for services with the municipal courts, the 7 municipal courts around the county. They not only do post-conviction, post-release probation, but they also do pretrial services for their court and the municipal courts. Similarly, the Superior Court Administrator manages a program that the task force helped set up, the pretrial services unit, which we got staffing and operating expenses for from the county council. Both Dave Reynolds and Bruce Van Glupt in the District Court Probation Office have been they're members of the task force. They're very active on what we call our Legal and Justice System Subcommittee. They're critical components of the pretrial processes work group that we have that's been working on increasing rationalized, safe pretrial release, because that was one of the recommendations from the Vera Institute report, was to stop keeping people pretrial largely for financial incapacity reasons. So Dave and Bruce are both very active in a lot of its planning and a lot of the task force considerations. They contribute their staff from their offices to discussions when that's appropriate. They both do great work. Some of the things that they're already doing is they've increased electronic home monitoring so that we as an alternative to incarceration, they can do scram bracelets, which are transdermal alcohol sensors for people who are released as long as they maintain sobriety. There are a number of other kinds of programs and services. And you probably heard of friendship diversion services, which many of the court systems are working with. So the short answer is yes, they're an active part of these discussions, an active part of these plannings, and they will continue to be expert resources for these projects.
I have another question, if that's okay. I don't have a developer's brain, so when I see a list of all the funding, I don't know how that translates into units. How many units do we expect to be able to add to the inventory?
That's a very good question, and I think it depends on how much state and federal funding can be leveraged. So with the small recovery housing RFP, I think we have in mind, like, please don't quote me on this, but like 2 or 3 projects, like for lack of a better term, right? Like small apartment buildings, a shared house, that sort of thing. Feels like $2 million of local leverage could be achievable with that amount of money. And for the large reentry supportive housing, just 40 to 60 units of PSH is sort of what I have in my head, but would look to Chris and Barbara and Brian, I know you're on this call, and others, but very dependent on the opportunity to leverage outside resources.
That gets back some to the question Mike raised about existing resources or expanded resources. Leverages can be a challenge. But when I saw the numbers, I assumed, yeah, that's proposed as the local share, and we're going to have to go hunting for state and federal.
I had a question. I don't know if we have a direct answer or a hunch to this, but kind of the root of the issue is, it's really shocking to hear how we got to a point in Whatcom where there's more people than there are housing. So like, what drove that up? Why are so many people here just abruptly that we don't even have homes for people? So I'm fairly new within the last 3-4 years to Whatcom County. So kind of came in, as things are, and there's been tons of changes, but I don't think I've really gotten any feedback of like how things progressed to this point. So I don't know if anybody has any historical information, because possibly that could be part of the answer. Kind of knowing how we got here, maybe that addressing that issue can slow it down, attacking the root of the issue. So, yeah.
Thanks, Adam. I don't know, Mike or Brian or others, if you want to share your thoughts on the complete market failure that is housing in West Coast cities, but
I'll jump in.
okay.
So statewide and regionally, we have so totally failed at keeping the construction of new homes anywhere near with the pace of the growth in population. We haven't even been building for enough new units for the folks who are born here, much less folks who relocate from elsewhere. And I relocated from elsewhere. A lot of us do. The legislature this year, legislature has been increasingly focused on housing. This session was especially productive, I think, not only in trying to, or in appropriating record-setting sums for affordable and subsidized housing, but also in making changes in zoning and other housing policies to break down some of the barriers. Quite frankly, single-family zoning has been a major barrier to developing or keeping up with the need for affordable housing. As a housing developer, finding land is the hardest darn thing, because for the most part we're restricted to rather limited definitely unnecessarily limited zones that allow multifamily, and that's just not realistic.
Yeah, thank you for that information. Just because as I hear some of the solutions that are coming up, it just makes me think about, okay, well, if this continues to snowball and progress, not to catastrophize thinking, but in worst case scenario, we're going to have people working to help other people, and they're also going to be homeless. And we're going to have, it's just this, if we're not addressing that issue directly, it's just going to get worse and worse. So it's like we're trying to boost up these positions in organizations and agencies and fill these gaps. It's just, yeah, we're going to have to fill them with the people that are here, and most of them, well, not most of, but hopefully not at that point, but yeah, a good chunk of them might be dealing with homelessness themselves and mental health issues and dealing with all the other gaps and things. So yeah, I guess hopefully we're taking a big bite out of that root issue. It sounds like some stuff is happening, but yeah, that would be my feedback, is to really focus on that.
I'll just add some thoughts in response to Adam that might supplement Brian's comments. Mine will come from a far less technical level of experience, but more a concerned observer. We're like a lot of places that have an older housing stock that's deteriorated over the last few decades. We've had a lot of influx of people who buy old houses and then renovate them to the max and for owner occupied rather than rental housing. Brian reported to the Board of Commissioners of the Housing Authority recently that the last public housing in the United States was constructed in 1990 or 1992. Basically, the federal government, which was the driver of affordable housing, just bailed out on that. They've never provided adequate maintenance and upgrade funding. So that's always, you're always behind the curve on that. The Housing Authority has been with the property it owns. Any affordable housing has been largely funded for the last 30 years through the low-income tax credit program, which is really sort of an incentive to very, very wealthy people. It has a time-limited affordability requirement. A lot of times that housing can turn into private market rate housing after a while. So it's always been a process where we've never had enough money. Even the tax credit funding availability is not anywhere near adequate. We're losing housing, we're losing maintenance, and we're gaining a lot of people, and a lot of people who can afford higher housing costs than what many people in the community can afford. So it's been a catch-up game, and not a very successful catch-up game for quite a long time. And Bellingham is just part of a national picture of those problems.
Thank you. I mean, it's very gloomy, but thank you for the facts.
Yeah, I agree with all that. It's just the truth. I want to be a little mindful of time. We're getting close to 5 here. Is it okay if we move on, Kayla? Okay. And I want to remind everyone that Kayla's information is in the chat if you want to provide feedback later after you've given some thought to the discussion here. Moving along on our agenda, City of Bellingham update. Katie, do you mind doing a quick update?
Of course. Thanks, Terry. And thank you, Kayla, Stephen, and Mike for a great discussion. I've learned so much today and I appreciate your time. I'll be quick, being mindful of time. I just have one update today. Want to share with this group that the draft consolidated plan that the city prepares every 5 years was presented and accepted by our city council on May 8th. Our consolidated plan provides an assessment of the city's community development needs and an analysis of the housing market, for low-income households. It is intended to present the goals, strategies, and specific activities that are implemented annually to address those needs. This is something that we at the city are required to complete every 5 years as a condition to receive our funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And it entails a pretty exhaustive analysis of the community's needs on the housing and human services front, touching on kind of a lot of the issues that we've been in discussion on over the last hour. The plan's informed by a pretty involved public engagement process that gathers feedback on community needs and solicits feedback on what our department should focus our funding on towards community planning. So I'll share this draft document in the chat with this coalition. As a top line summary, the 5 main goals that the city has outlined in this plan are: 1, reducing housing cost burden for low and moderate income households; 2, providing vulnerable households with services so they may remain stably housed; 3, helping vulnerable households meet their basic needs; 4, increasing safety for vulnerable groups; and lastly, preventing housing discrimination and increasing protections for low-income renters. So those 5 goals are going to inform all of the strategies and initiatives that my department will be funding. I encourage everyone on this discussion today to read this plan. It provides a really good framework for you all to understand what the city's priorities are in the coming years on the community development side, and what strategies we'll be supporting that address housing needs and homelessness needs, and where we plan to allocate our public resources. I should note that I'm sharing the draft plan. The final plan will be available on the city website soon. It's just awaiting final HUD approval, but that'll be available on our website shortly. And that's all I have for today. Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Katie. Next item on our agenda would be a county update. I'm not sure whether Chris or Barbara wants to do that.
I will hop in because Barbara's having some mic issues.
Thank you.
I think maybe something really timely to talk about, and I'll try to be real quick here too, is next week, I think probably at the end of the week, we will publish the point in time count report. I'm not going to give any spoilers here while it's still being finalized, but I do want to just kind of deliver a little bit of message on how to read that report and what it says and what it doesn't say. I feel like this comes up almost every year. We'll publish this report. There'll be that headline number that gets everyone's attention, and somebody always says, like, you guys are lying to us. We know there's more people out there than that. Say, yes, there are. This is the number of people that we counted. This is the information about the people that we counted. There are lots of people that we didn't count because we didn't know where to find them, or they didn't want to talk to us. So just want to reiterate that the number there is, I wouldn't even call it a minimum. It's like obviously an undercount. It's impossible that we count everyone. So take that number for what it is. We're seeing some of the similar trends we've seen in the past. Families with children are having a hard time. Seniors are having a hard time. People experiencing discrimination and people with disabilities are having a hard time. So as we kind of operate this housing system, that place of scarcity was referred to earlier, I guess I hope that when we look at this report and think about ways to interpret it, it's not, to me, the numbers are important, but it's also about the people, right? So we see homelessness not impacting us across the board in the same way. People who have these other challenges and hardships in their lives are much more likely to become homeless as a result of all these other things that we've talked about today, the downfall or the shortcomings of our incarceration system, the challenges around housing affordability. It impacts people who already have these other challenges the hardest. So I guess just as we communicate about homelessness, I think I would like to see us talk about it, not just as like homelessness being terrible in and of itself, but it's also a real double whammy when it comes to the experience of injustice that people feel as a result of those conditions. I think that's all I want to say about the point in time count report. And with 4 minutes left in the meeting, I'll hit the mute button.
Thanks, Chris. You just reminded me of something that one of my colleagues found. It is a campaign essentially to humanize people experiencing homelessness. And I'm going to put this link in the chat. I know that this is a SAC company. Bombas does a lot of donations. They donated a whole bunch of socks to us for veterans recently. But I hope you can take a moment to peruse that link and read some of the really shocking things that people experience that we don't necessarily consider. One thing that my colleague said stood out was one of the stories in here was a person who went a month without ever hearing his own name or saying anything. I mean, that's just devastating how isolating it is to experience homelessness. And jumping into the service center update, I don't have a whole lot to share except that we are recruiting for program support specialists, and that job is open until the 6th. So if you know anyone who would be interested in joining the service center, I encourage you to look at opco.org and look at our careers page and apply. And then I guess the only other update I can think of is that we're involved in the way station project. I don't know if everyone knows about that, but essentially this is going to be a facility on 1500 State Street. It already exists. It's being converted from offices into half medical respite that Opportunity Council will operate, and half hygiene services, showers and laundry and that kind of thing, and medical services that Unity Care Northwest will operate. This is a partnership between Unity Care, Opportunity Council, Peace Health, and Whatcom County. And the news I have is that the permits were issued and it's out for bid, hoping that it will come online in about a year. I don't know. We'll see. So that's my update there. And we have a couple of minutes if anyone wants to provide any kind of public comment. I'm happy to stay past 5 if need be. I understand if people need to leave, so I'll just stop talking and provide that opportunity.
I want to jump in briefly and applaud Terry's last comment about the way station. One of the obstacles the task force has run into is how siloed some services tend to be. And the way station is a great example of the way walls can be broken down between medical, behavioral health, homeless services, and other services. Part of our project discussion has been a way to integrate a similar kind of open entry facility, maybe to the way station, adding re-entry services and other kinds of treatment modalities to a central site that's available to everyone, sort of no barriers.
Does anyone know right off the bat if the county or one of our cities in the county can hold a special housing focused lottery system?
I do not know the answer to that, Bon.
I don't either, but I like the way you think.
Worth looking at, Vaughn, but there are a lot of questions that a lot of people would have to weigh in on to move that forward.
Such as?
Well, the first one that comes to my mind as a retired lawyer is it possible for a locality to sponsor any sort of game of chance, so to speak? Or is that a state monopoly, so to speak?
That was a good pun, sort of, Stephen, with the monopoly and the.
Anyone else? Well, thanks again, everyone, for being here today. I appreciate all the input that was provided, and I think this generated a lot of ideas for me, so I may send an email later myself. Have a great evening. I think we'll just adjourn. Bye, everybody.